Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for waiting for a moment as we were working through some Zoom issues. My name is Scott Hutchinson, and I am the host for today's UCLA Conversations with TEDx speakers. And today I am working along with my co-host Ken Heller, and we are incredibly excited to have our future TEDxUCLA speaker, Kitty Felde, a true radio legend, author, and producer of a podcast for kids. Today, we are looking at ways to create space for real conversations and looking at this in respect to kids and grandkids. Before I turn this over to Ken Heller to get the conversation going, I just want to give you a few housekeeping notes. This is absolutely a community conversation. We'd love to hear your ideas, thoughts, and questions in the chat window. I'll be monitoring that and then giving that information back to Kitty and Ken. And please do turn off your video and audio. It helps us record the session a little bit better. And after this, we capture the Zoom video and put it up on our TEDx website. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ken Heller, my colleague, and get this conversation going. Ken?
Thank you, Scott. I am genuinely excited to be here. And in a very TEDx-esque way, we like to get right to the core of things. And I'm excited that I'm here with Kitty today. So Kitty, there's so many things we're going to talk about, but I want to start out with really the core question, which is that magic and what does it take to engage, we'll start with students and kids, but almost anyone. How do you engage them in a conversation? And at a critical point, why is that important?
Well, I think it's important because they're the smartest people on planet Earth. I mean, think about when you were 12 years old and you knew everything. And if only an adult would treat you like you had half a brain in your head, then you would tell them everything. I mean, to me, there's a lot of wisdom that is there to be tapped. If only we will, A, listen, and B, ask the right questions to get that conversation started. So the big question, of course, is how do you do that? My technique is to have something else that will leave space for a conversation. So an activity. And in my case, with book club, the podcast, I talk to kids about books, theoretically. I mean, we don't sit around and discuss theme and synonyms and all that kind of stuff because they get that in English class. What we talk about is what's going on in their lives, and the way that conversation comes out is through the books. And there's lots of ways, I can tell you how some of these conversations have gone in very unexpected ways. But again, that's just my technique as a book. But quite frankly, a lot of other things can work really, really well as well. As long as you don't start with that stupid question, which is, hey, so how was school? Because who cares? You don't care, they don't care. What are they going to tell you? It doesn't get the conversation anywhere. What you really want to know is what's going on inside of their heads, what's going on inside of their hearts, and how do you tap that? So I suggest activities. If it's not a book that you're reading together and discussing, I mean, that's a great way to do it. And you can think about your own book clubs. Without the alcohol, you're chatting about them pretty much the same way, we hope without the alcohol, with kids. So you start with a book, and then you listen to where that conversation is going. And it will always take a left turn. Suddenly you are talking about, who knows what, space invaders, and the conversation goes into a totally different direction if you are listening. So it involves listening really, really carefully to what it is they really want to talk about.
How do we get better at our listening skills? I know that with our new environment of every other moment, it feels like we're on another Zoom call or on a Facebook Live conversation, that our capacity to listen is challenged. And for some of us, we really never learned to be good listeners. How do you do that? How do you start the conversation off to get people to be prepared to listen?
Well, I don't think it starts with starting off. I mean, I really think it means shutting up. You ask a question and you wait, and you wait, and sometimes you wait again, and listen for clues in their vocal, what are they saying? What tone of voice are they using? You can hear when someone is really speaking from the heart. You can tell when you've tapped something special. You're watching for, verbal cues, for physical cues from that other person. If they're looking away, if they're distracted, you've lost them. So it's again, how do you get them to, kind of focus back on the conversation? And that gets back again, I think, to activities, because you're doing something that has nothing to do with what it is you're really interested in, talking to them about. And doing it takes time, and good conversations take time. So you have to, again, allow that open space for that really important thing you've always wanted to hear to drop in. And I'll use a dumb example. I have 6 brothers. And my dad has been not feeling particularly well. And suddenly they started a text stream, basically saying, call your dad, he's not feeling well. But the conversation, and this went on for 3.5 hours. I was lurking. I didn't want to participate because I'm the older sister and I knew they didn't really want to talk to me. I mean, they put me in the text stream, but I really was more interested in what they were talking about. And about 2 hours in, they started talking about their beefs from when they were 12 years old, things they felt were unfair, why they treated somebody's wife the way they did. All of these things started bubbling to the surface because they had created space for those conversations to happen. Now that happened in between the, terrible jokes, the filthy language, the bad pictures, the memes they would put up there. But, once you got the clutter out of the way, they were opening up in ways I had never seen them do before.
How, you talked about doing this electronically. How have you found conversations changed from doing live interactions with the students or interviews versus this format? How has that changed for you, and how do you see people interacting in a different way in this medium?
I don't like this. I have to admit, I really hate Zoom. It's exhausting. You're focused on this person all the time. You're worried about yourself and what do you look like? And you can see little pictures of yourself doing things that are really unnatural. So you're a lot more self-conscious about stuff. I don't like it. We taped a podcast episode last week for the first time. And it was the first time really I had an opportunity to try this. And it just wasn't relaxed. It wasn't natural. And part of that is, I think the technology is there's always that hair of a delay that happens there. And I'm one that came from radio, and you don't like dead air. And so you're always trying to fill the dead air. And it's really hard for me to just shut up and remind myself, when it comes to podcasting, I can take it out in the edit. We'll all sound brilliant in the edit, just shut up. So it's really hard for me to do that. And so I don't like it. I just don't like it.
I've found in my conversations, and I have more than enough Zoom conversations to fill a day, I found that silence is more pronounced when there's video. When there's exclusively audio, we live with that silence. And as you well know, sometimes it's in the silence that gives people the opportunity to rethink what they were going to do. But when they become self-conscious, as Zoom causes us to do. So do you see any advantages of Zoom or any of the video technologies as far as helping people engage? Have you found that they respond differently in this environment?
I don't know if they respond differently. And again, you're just seeing people from here up. So you're not really seeing their whole body language, which again is so much a big part of our communication. I always think about Terry Gross, who never liked interviewing people in person. She would always do it in the studio, and they would be in a studio hundreds of thousands of miles away. And because she was sort of an introvert. And so for her, it was easier to ask tough questions. It was easier to have a more intimate conversation when she was just having them in their ears. And I wonder if the video, and I should say, by the way, she was the worst interview I ever had, because even though she's really good at asking questions, she doesn't like answering questions. She would always answer with one-word answers, which is like, okay, now where do we go from here? But that said, I think there is something intimate about listening. And it's really a shame, I think, that our phones are such lousy devices these days. You know, I can remember dating and holding the phone up to one's head, you know, and whispering into the phone. And it was a very intimate conversation. Now it's like, what'd you say? What'd you say? I just think it's a much more intimate medium. So again, I'm just dissatisfied. It's great to see people's faces, but you can't touch them. You can't hug them. You can't see what their body language is. You know, we're literally talking heads right now.
It
But
is.
that's all we got, Ken.
Well, that's the unfortunate aspect of for so many of our family members. And since we're all in the situation where we are, it's I won't even say it's a second best. It's our only alternative, because you can't have the physical contact. One of the things that in listening to in some of your conversations, and you and I have talked about this, is the challenges of, but you do it pretty well. And I won't say pretty well, you do it very well. How do you engage in a difficult conversation? Because sometimes in the conversations you have with the students, that you're getting them to talk about things that are very difficult, whether it's death or it's fear. How do you do that? How do you make that comfortable enough for someone to share with you?
Well, I think you structure a conversation, at least, you know, when I used to do interviews for radio, you would not hide, but you would hold on to your more difficult questions that you'd have to ask until you built that trust. I can always remember our current Attorney General, Javier Becerra, was one of the leaders in Democratic congressional circles. And so he would have press conferences every week. So we would go to the press conferences and I'd follow up with a question afterwards. And he would give me the, you know, standard line, the party line. And I would ask the question again, a little different way. And he would give me sort of a variation on the party line. And then about the third time when I'd ask the question, you know, I wasn't going away, and he would sigh, and, you know, good stuff would sneak out, just sneak out. And I think persistence, I think that's one thing, is there's no reason, if they don't give you an answer first, you can ask it a little differently, et cetera, et cetera. And if you build up the trust with people, which is what I always felt that, you know, members of the California congressional delegation trusted me, because they knew I wasn't going to stab them in the back. I could ask hard questions because they felt that I was an honest broker. Well, I mean, if they're your grandkids, hopefully you are an honest broker. You don't have that obstacle to get over. But you got to rekindle that trust with those kids. You got to kind of, you know, remind them of why they like you. You talk to them about what they like. Gosh, what a concept. And then as the conversation progresses, you know, if you have something you really want to tackle, you don't present it with, you know, great big headlines and blaring lights. It's just part of the next wave of where the conversation is going. And it comes in, and it's not more important than asking what they had for breakfast, you know, but it is. But by then, you know, they're comfortable with you. And that's where that conversation happens. And I would say, you don't stop there. I mean, I really feel like it's almost like one of those, you know, how do you structure drama? You start, you know, here, you go up, you have your climax, you have your denouement. Well, you need your denouement here, even in a conversation. And I think that denouement, for me anyway, is humor. You know, there's always something wonderful and funny, and it diffuses the pain or the seriousness or the tension of that really important thing with, yeah, it's okay. We are still friends. We still love each other. You know, there's that way of getting off stage gracefully.
Well, I know that we're not designed to only talk about book club for kids, but using that as a, you know, as a point of reference, you've had some great success also of engaging authors and engaging actors to be part of it, to read. What is it that you think makes it interesting for them? What draws them to want to participate? Because we all know that people have lots of things they could be doing. Why would they choose your forum to dedicate some time and to read and to engage with the students. But what is it that's happening there that causes them to want to participate?
Oh, I think authors, are grand. They would speak to as many kids as possible. And unfortunately, they don't have enough time. I mean, writing takes a heck of a lot of time. And this is a way to engage with their fans, people who think they walk on water. And we let the kids ask the questions these days. So they get to actually hear what the readers are thinking about, what's going on inside of their heads. It's a unique opportunity for them, I think. And our celebrity readers, God love them. I mean, we've had the former Secretary of Education was on our show. I mean, obviously, his motive was to try to engage more American kids in reading. He was there to do that. We had an FBI agent who was in charge of weapons of mass destruction. And he was one of our readers for one of our spy books. And he wanted to engage kids to let them know that, if you're interested in science, you can be an FBI agent. I mean, they're not exactly motives that make any sense. But the other side is, the people I ask are people who love to perform or love to share their love of books. We're all sort of in this group together. We have something in common.
Scott, I want to turn back to you because I know there's a number of questions that are coming up. And I want to make sure we start to capture them as we're moving along, that we don't just wait until the end to capture them, because then it's a matter of catch up. So what's jumping out at you?
Yeah, thanks everyone for starting to put questions in here. Nathan mentioned that he's had some pretty engaging Zoom experiences for a wedding. I know a friend just got married on it. Sherry mentioned using Instagram Live. It could be fun. And another around using Netflix social. So this idea of having two-way conversations, I'm kind of curious, based on those, if we didn't have video right now, we were actually having Zoom issues getting your video up, but we potentially had your audio, would this be a different experience? Would people be hearing things differently? Is the video actually adding to or potentially deleting from the experience of really hearing what you're saying?
I prefer audio. I've been in radio for 3 decades and it's so intimate. I would be less self-conscious. I wouldn't have put makeup on. It's a different kind of, it's more like, you're in your bathrobe, you're much more comfortable. And I think the conversation might have been a little bit more. I would have been less. How's that?
Just along that idea, you mentioned Terry Gross and this distance that she self-creates to kind of help cause a great conversation. And now we're in a social distancing space, yet we're trying to get closer and closer together. How are you dealing with that in terms of your conversations with kids to get them to open up and talk about things that are important to them?
Well, as I said, we've only formally done this once so far, Scott. So I really can't say there's a large body of experience that goes with that. But I certainly have at least learned that next time I will allow more time. I will have more conversations with the kids before we start recording, so they will get to know me and I will get to know them, and I'll try to remember their names this time, that kind of thing, so that we get the technical stuff out of the way so that we're just not worrying about that. And then we will hopefully forget about the camera.
I think it's essential that you have that kind of initial getting used to period of allowing people to feel comfortable. And I don't think we ever forget that the camera is on.
Yeah.
But the fact is, if it's a good connection, we at least get to see the response of a nodding head or a smile. And then we kind of get rid of everything that's around us. With the young Shakespeareans, my colleague Allison was able to, as we shifted and we went into that format of doing rehearsals and workshops for Romeo and Juliet, the first step was getting those 22 students to feel comfortable of just catching up with each other, because it was before LA Unified got into their own program. So once they felt comfortable enough in that, you could accomplish a lot more. You could do a lot more, but it still took that getting used to, and even the fact of feeling comfortable with the environments, and whether you're going to use a virtual background or you're going to see the fan above me, just forget about it. So I think there's a comfort that has to be set. And we're discovering that, and we've discovered that, and I think that's what you're saying as well, that you need to have enough time, almost like for a 1 hour broadcast, you probably want to get in 45 minutes before, just so people feel themselves.
You know, the first time I'm in a writer's group, the first time that the playwrights got together for a Zoom session, it was an hour of check-in. It was longer than the play read.
Really?
Yeah, because people were hungry for it. They were hungry to, you know, have human contact in whatever form we could get it at this point in life.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree. But now you had an advantage, Ken, because you had a relationship with those kids in, you know, touch human to human before you actually did the taping. Before you
Yes. Yes.
that makes a difference.
Our teaching artists and Allison had all been engaged with these students previously. And so as we shifted into this virtual environment, we did have that advantage. In a lot of situations, new mediums are being created where you have to create those relationships all virtually. I mean, we're all finding ourselves in those situations on a daily basis. And that, yeah, you're right. I mean, unfortunately, we all don't get that brief time to just say, so, hey, this is pretty weird, isn't it? How are things for you?
Yeah.
Do you know anyone who's affected? Yes, we're all affected. So it's an interesting pivot, and it's a word that I don't know if I'm quite done listening to, but the word pivot seems to come up a lot in conversations of what's happening with how people do business, how we conduct ourselves, and then being able to shift and say, well, you can't do it the old way.
Yeah.
And therefore, what will that new way be? I mean, do you envision your podcasts changing, given the fact that this may be the model we're using for quite a while?
Yeah, actually, we've already pivoted. Every other week we do, I call them bonus episodes, shorter episodes, where basically we ask everybody our favorite question: what is your favorite book and why? And we've been soliciting tape from kids. You can record yourself on the voice memo app of your phone. We've got a little script. We've been sending it. And what we've been doing is we've been really reaching out to libraries who are famous for their summer reading programs. I've had that since I was a kid reading.
Right.
And they're struggling to find ways to engage kids remotely as well. And so we've been trying to be a partner to them to give them an opportunity to get their young patrons, let them be podcast stars, you know, talk to us. We have a phone number where people can call in. But I think we are looking towards the fall. Are we going to be able to be allowed to go back into schools? And if not, we will be doing Zoom tapings. One of our folks back in Washington, D.C. reached out to us. We had been to their school a couple of years ago. And she says, well, now that we're all doing things on Zoom, can you do it with us? And I think what I'm going to have to do, Ken, is what we were saying is, how do you get people comfortable? And I think I'm going to have to come up with virtual icebreakers, things that we can do before we start taping, you know, which will give us a chance to play with the technology, but also to really kind of establish a bit of a relationship, even virtually, between me and the kids.
What if you know, Scott, go ahead, and then I have a question.
I have a Kitty, there's a question from Kirsten, more about your writing. Why mysteries, and how did you choose that genre for writing? And then what made you decide to engage with kids? Were there a few moments that were important to you in that space?
Well, let me start with the second question first. I don't know why kids. I don't have any kids. I should say that. I'm one of 7. So I always say that I've raised my younger brothers. I've put enough diapers and cleaned up baby vomit to really kind of, you know, it's a great birth control item. But I've always had a good rapport with kids. They always talk to me. They always have talked to me because I don't talk down to them, because I can remember being 12 and people would treat me like I was an idiot. So I don't ever want to disrespect kids that way. But we were at the LA Times Festival of Books when I was doing a talk show on KPCC. And people would come up to you and they would say, oh, I love your show. And then they'd be dragging their kid with them. And the kid would go, yeah, I listen too. Why are you listening? There's nothing on that show for you. And they'd go, yeah, I know, but I'm in mom's carpool. So the conversation ended up, because we were at a book festival, what would you be interested in? They said books. We started bringing them in once a month, throwing the adults out and just chatting with them about books. So that was how that happened, how the podcast happened. But I've always had I like talking to kids. They're interesting. They're easier to talk to than politicians. Let's just leave it at that. And as to mysteries, I'm come late to the party. I've just now come to just doing nothing but reading mysteries these days. I'm on my Dorothy L. Sayers kick right now. I love them. And they're very formulaic in a lot of ways, like a screenplay or writing a play. There's rules that you have to follow. And I like rules because it lets you be creative in it. And the mystery that I wrote is, it's about the demon cat of Capitol Hill, and it's called Welcome to Washington, Fina Mendoza. And it's the daughter of a congressman from California who solves the mystery of the demon cat. But it was, for me, to write the book was a way for me to talk about the things I love about Washington, D.C. and share them with this next generation, to really kind of teach them civics in a sneaky little way. And I love the U.S. Capitol, and it's like a playground for me, and it is for Fina in the book, and I get to explore the weird stuff about it. And people got tired of me talking about it once I moved back to California, and this was sort of my way of continuing my secret Washington life.
You mentioned earlier to me some of the great unsung heroes on our planet, which are librarians. And I know that you've had a lot of engagement and support from librarians.
Yeah.
What role do you see libraries playing as we return? I won't say to any, because normal will no longer be normal, but what role do you see as they take us toward the new life that we will have?
They are my heroes. I mean, they really do the work. And I think they are in danger, quite frankly, because mostly people see them as people who shelve and check out books, physical books. And that's not what they do. They are gateways to technology. Those of us struggling with various kinds of new technologies, they know it. For writers looking for information, they know how to find it. They are the keepers of our intellectual life. I think about, burning down the Library of Alexander, and what a great world tragedy that was. If a library burned down today, or even our LA library when it was burnt,
yes,
2 decades ago, would we respond in the same way? I don't know. I fear that librarians are not given the respect they deserve, and school librarians who are out there every single day dealing with chaos and creativity and all of that stuff that happens inside of a school library. They're my heroes.
I agree, and that's one of the reasons I brought it up, of even the role that they have played through this. They've been at the front end for Los Angeles when it came to how do we provide services to homeless people.
Yeah.
But continuation of how shall we continue to make resources available, and how do we help steer through? So big shout out, but I know that you've been engaged with librarians since the very beginning of your podcast. And that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I think it's essential that we acknowledge the importance of it. Scott?
Tonya asks, Kitty, if you weren't talking with kids about books or writing books for kids, what would you be doing? And maybe along with that, what's next for you with this big shift, assuming that this isolation isn't just going to go away and we are going to be acting differently? How are you going to, how might you be shifting?
Well, I think we're going to continue to do book club. I think that's my current mission in life right now. I really think it's important to try to engage with kids about books, because we're losing them to technology in a lot of ways. And this is a way to make technology work for getting a kid's nose back in that book, or in their Kindle, as the case may be, or an audiobook. This is a way to try to do that. And I feel that it's an important mission. I don't know. I mean, if I weren't writing, if I weren't doing the podcast, I would be at my sewing machine 24/7, I suppose. But there's just so many clothes one can make, and there's not a lot of places you can wear them these days. That's been the big problem.
Masks are very popular these days, but hopefully not for long.
No.
Yes.
I like clothing. I like, making pretty dresses is what I like.
You also, and Sherry asked this question, a lot of your work is in person with the celebrity at the library with the kids talking, and now it's remote. What about people that don't have access to the technology? How is that changing for you?
Well, two things. Almost everybody has a smartphone. Not everybody, but almost everybody has a smartphone, and that's technology in a box, basically. You know, you can record yourself, you can Zoom on that, you can do a Google Hangout, although they're calling it Google Meet, I guess these days. There are Instagram lives you can do. There's lots of things you can do with a phone, and kids are so technologically savvy. I don't know that any of them will ever buy a television set. You know, I don't think they need that. I don't think they even know they need a laptop at this point. And if they aren't doing a lot of writing or other kinds of programs that you need on a laptop, they may never even have one of those once they get older. So I think we're looking at the future in our hand. That's what's going on there. The challenge is the internet access issue. And this is another area that libraries have become so important. If you go by a public library, you'll see a lot of people parked outside. And those are people who have no internet access at home. And a lot of those are kids who are stuck trying to do home lessons, you know, in a car outside a library. Mm-hmm. So the technology accessibility is a big deal. And a lot of that's going to wait until we're all 5G and municipalities start spreading it around to everybody. But boy, is that a challenge.
Well, the other challenge that goes about it is whether or not we're creating content that works on various speeds. You know, it used to be, you know, I can laugh and we talk about my years when we would deal with students at UCLA who would, let's say, misused access to technology. And one of the thoughts we had, which we never implemented, was, well, you know what? If you're going to do that, we'll put you on modem service. So go ahead and see how many illegal things you can do, but you're only going to be connected at 300 baud. So, you know, it's just set your alarm. So we never did that, but we have that differentiation of those with the haves and have-nots and speeds. So that's definitely of concern, and it's a concern right now. You and I had a conversation a little while ago, and you shared something with me, numbers of popularity on podcasts. Now, prior to this podcast, and granted, you have a successful podcast, however we define success, we have many people watching it. But listening tendencies have changed. You shared with me some numbers about how for young adult and kids podcasts, listenership has changed. We also know that listenership has changed for other kinds of podcasts. Let's talk about that.
Well, it's actually been an interesting conversation going on in the podcasting world, because numbers, initially particularly, numbers for listeners in podcasts for adults dropped because people weren't commuting, and that's where a lot of people were listening to podcasts. Mm-hmm. They've started creeping back up. But I want to compare that to podcasts for kids. I mean, I'll just use our number because I don't have access to everybody's, but I've heard this conversationally from other people who belong to Kids Listen, which is this grassroots group of people who do podcasts for kids. Our numbers have gone crazy. And a lot of that is parents and teachers looking for at-home learning materials. But I mean, just for example, our website hits went up 200% month over month. I mean, that was like what? And our downloads went up 40% month over month. You know, it wasn't doing, you know, I still haven't got Google ads. I haven't got Google's approval to do nonprofit ads yet. So I can't even say it was because we were doing advertising.
Right.
It's just, there's such a need. And I look at, see who is accessing our material. And almost all of it comes from Google Classroom or Microsoft, whatever their classroom infrastructure is. And so they are tapping into our material, which I'm really happy about. So that's where that is coming from. I think that we can basically say that parents are going crazy at home and they're desperate for anything they can do to help their kids keep up or, you know, stay learning, or at least shut up while they're in their own Zoom meeting with the office.
You know, you've raised a really interesting, in my mind, interesting question, that most podcasts are the delivery of content and we consume it and you go on to the next episode. But a significant part of what happens with yours is giving referrals. and having a place for people to have access to other content. And that's not something that's available. How do you feel about that? Why do you think that's so important for you to have a place for people to say, well, you've listened, but now to learn, almost like in the old days, gosh, if you want to learn more about this, here's a link, and even before the internet. So why is it so important for you to have that other content for people to connect with?
Well, I think we all want somebody else to tell us what to read next, or, you know, what we should be watching on Netflix, or, you know, I mean, we think about word of mouth. That's sort of the way we get our information. You know, what's the best pair of sneakers to use to walk around these days? And who's the best grocery delivery service? We rely on our neighbors and our friends to tell us these kinds of things. And in many ways, that's kind of what I feel we're doing with book club, is we're making friendly recommendations for things that it's not as annoying as, well, if you bought this product, you might be interested in these. But that's sort of the same idea, is that we want to be of use. I mean, that's the purpose of Book Club for Kids. And how can we best be of use? And we've gotten so many, you know, suggestions from librarians and teachers about ways to improve the website or other things we can offer. We just want to be of use.
Kitty, Kieran asks, and maybe I'll kind of read into it a little bit. He says he sets aside quiet time to sit together and read books as a family. What's different about consuming a book and having conversations about books? When we originally started talking, it was this idea of having the conversation. It almost became not about the book, but about opening up and almost having by listening, having an insight or reveal about something going on in that person's life. How is consuming books and having conversations around books doing the things that you're trying to get this vehicle to do, to get people, I imagine, to open up?
Well, I think reading a book is a very solitary thing. You know, generally, unless we're in a formal book group, we don't sit around and discuss novels. Well, some people do. New Yorkers claim they do it all the time. But anyway, as a general rule, that isn't the conversation that we have. We're more likely to talk about, in the old days, how the Dodgers were doing, you know, or how's the weather, how was the traffic? That's always the first question. But if you have a book and you are starting with that book, so let me just use an example. There's a wonderful book called The Crossover by Kwame Alexander. He won the Newbery. It's a book in verse about brothers in basketball. And it's a lovely book to read aloud, actually, because of the verse. When I went into this school library in Washington, D.C., there was a group of 5th grade boys, and they were literally, and I'm not kidding, climbing the walls. They were up on the bookshelves, and the librarian had to go in and pluck them off and sit them down. And I thought, this is not going to go very well. But we had the conversation. We started with the book, and we talked about basketball and verse. And when we started talking about sibling relationships, suddenly something happened. And I don't know what, but one of the boys was talking about, you know, I hate my sister, and I was so happy when she went away to college. And then I got really sad, and I don't know why. Well, that sparked the conversation with the next kid, who started talking about his dad, who got on a ladder and had to change the lights in the Amtrak station, and he always worries he's going to fall off the ladder. And this went on and on. These boys were in tears by the time that thread of the conversation. And how did we get there? With a book about basketball? I mean, it was magic. And that happens. I see that happen all the time. And there's just something about a book. It's full of ideas, and something in there is going to resonate with those kids. Something is just going to turn on, literally, that light bulb in their heart or in their mind. And if you're there to witness it, if you're there to follow up, go down that path, take that left turn, it's pure magic.
That's wonderful.
I'm going to shift, ask another question. Penny, and I imagine Bill, mentioned that you're kind of suggesting being empathetic when sensing a child's emotions, but isn't empathy in short supply in our culture?
I disagree, but I'm an optimist. I mean, I see it every day. I see people doing kind things. I see, I don't know. I think it's an attitude. I hate to say that, attitude of gratitude, but I mean, I've got my ballet teacher at the end of each Zoom meeting telling us, you know, to go out and say 3 nice things to people. I think right now, particularly, we are in a very vulnerable place. We all are. And even though we're short with each other and we get mad when people don't have masks and they walk close to you, as a whole, you know, human beings are pretty nice people. And I think we are seeing little bits of kindness sneak out. And I think if we look for it, we'll see more of it.
Well, speaking of that, Janet mentions that those moments of kindness are noticed by kids, and kids tend to emulate what adults do. Um, uh, are adults reading enough books, and are there things that we can do as adults to help kids mirror us in powerful and healthy ways?
Well, I think you said it right there. It's mirroring. You know, are you reading? And I have to say, I can't pick up anything that's really heavy literary right now. I just don't have the mental capacity right now to really focus and think and give it the, I don't know, the time and the energy, emotional energy it takes, which is maybe why I'm breezing through all the Peter Wimseys right now. But if your mysteries isn't your thing, then why not pick up a book of kids reading? There's some great middle grade literature out there. We've got tons of suggestions that kids have made on our website, bookclubforkids.org. But ask your kids what they're reading. What are they interested in? Have you read Percy Jackson? Are you interested in Greek mythology? It's a great trip to go on. If you really want some great humor, pick up a Stuart Gibbs. He's got lots of series on zoo adventures or spy adventures. There's so many really wonderfully written books out there that are a little less taxing right now. And share it with your kid. I mean, read the same book they're reading. If it's Goodnight Moon, you read Goodnight Moon, you know, and even if the kid's 15 years old, sometimes Goodnight Moon is what we all need right now. But just anything works. Anything works.
I think you've touched on the fact that our bandwidth has been somewhat impacted. Our capacity, and I think we just have that ability to say, I only have room for this much.
Yeah.
But just like the example of pouring a little more water in between the rocks, there is room for those things that uplift us.
Yeah.
And I think we just have to make that time to just say, how does that make it easier? A conversation like this, I walk away from this a lot more uplifted because I've gotten to talk about things like empathy and why is that so important. Scott.
Kitty, if as we're about to wrap up, if this was your TEDx and you were on stage at Royce, and I wish you were, I think our event technically was 3 days ago, and of course it didn't happen. We would have been coaching and asking you questions like, what is your TED wish? What do you want the audience to walk away humming in their head, thinking about, maybe do differently? It could be a small action, it could be a large change. What might those be? And then we'll wrap up right after.
Yeah, I would urge you to try it. You know, I mean, what's the worst that can happen? If this doesn't lead to anything, you know, is the kid going to hang up the phone on you? You know, is it going to, you know, ban you and block your number and never talk to you again? Give it a shot. You know, again, I say pick up a book, but it could be teach a kid chess over Zoom. You know, it could be, let's do a recipe together in the kitchen. It doesn't matter. I sew with my niece, and I got a phone call out of the blue from a kid I taught to sew. I even forgot this. Years and years and years ago up in Maine, we would go up and visit for the summer, and their 14-year-old kid had nothing to do. She called me out of the blue. Those relationships last. It's magic. It works. I promise you. You just have to be patient. And one more thing. There is StoryCorps has a wonderful app where you can record each other asking questions. So if you feel that you'd like to preserve your stories or your conversations with your kids, it's free. You can download it. There's instructions. It's not hard. And again, your phone is your magic box. It can do almost anything. So just give it a shot.
Thank you. Sherry mentioned, speaking of what you just said, that she sends books to kids in her life. And Ellen mentions that she runs a book club for 4th and 5th graders and always has 1 or 2 clubs for kids and their parents, making great connections over great books.
Ellen,
so
we'll put your kids on the show.
There you go. Great. Yeah, please, you know how to contact Kitty afterwards. So Ken, why don't the two of you wrap up? And I'll just briefly mention, I really appreciate Kitty, you doing this. We will, again, record or capture this Zoom, and we'll push it up to the website, so you'll be able to see it there. And Ken and Kitty, do you want to wrap this?
For me, if this is the entirety of the conversation, then I'm disappointed, because so much of what happens and the value of this is what happens next.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is by us going through the questions and us being able to reach out. And the fact is that once this gets posted, it is a platform for continuing to engage. I know I'll be watching that. I know Kitty will be watching it, because it gives us the opportunity to continue this conversation, because the conversation really is a conversation starter. And that's really where this should be. Kitty, your thoughts?
I have nothing else to say except thank you for asking me and letting me talk about the things I love best, which is basically talking to kids about books. So I'm a happy bunny. Thank you.
We were excited that you were able to join us. And Scott, thanks for the opportunity, and TEDx for us to be able to do this, because it's a great platform.
Kitty and everyone on the call, we will post the website and information about Kitty. I encourage you to watch her podcasts and get involved with the things that she's doing. And that's it. We will wrap. Thank you, everyone, and see you soon, we hope.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, Kitty. It was great. Bye-bye.